Hello, everyone. This is Lynn with Divine Reset, and I am so excited to be here today for Inspiration Series. It is the first series for this new year, and I'm so honored that I have this time and space with you. Divine Reset's purpose is to help empower women in a way that they can find peace and happiness, even if the house is burning down. So that's a figurative imagination of finding peace, but really we have so much thrown at us. We have a lot of hats that we wear, and no matter what is going on, it doesn't take away from your identity and divinity as a child of the Supreme Being. And so that's why we're here with Inspiration Series, bringing guests on that can help us to kind of weed out all the patterns and thoughts that we've had, that the ideal of, things being a certain way is going to allow us to be happy. Well, that's just not true. And so our guest today is going to help us see some things that you might be doing that are keeping you unhappy and how you can deal with it. And so our guest today, her name is Jennifer Whitacre. She lives in Ohio, and she is a very intelligent woman. I am very impressed with her. I met her, 2 months ago in Sedona with the Wellness Universe and Soul Treat. She was one of the presenters, and that is a coveted spot for Soul Treat. And I am so blessed that I was able to be there because her message really changed my life. And I'm so honored that she is here today. So Jennifer, please tell us a little bit more about you.
Oh, well, thank you, Lynn, for having me. My name's Jennifer Whitacre. I'm a trauma specialist and empowerment strategist and a podcaster. I have my own show too. And so how I got to where I am and what I'm doing, I grew up in a household where there was a lot of trauma. Both of my parents were abusive in very, very different ways. So I came out of childhood with an ACE score of 9 out of 10 because I like to be, high achieving. I say that jokingly. An ACE score is, in the world of trauma, one of the things that we look at to assess childhood adversity. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And research in the last 20 to 30 years has linked childhood experiences, again, adverse childhood experiences, like growing up in poverty, having abusive parents that verbally or physically abuse you or neglect you, having a family member that went to prison, having a family member that spent a lot of time in the hospital for major health issues. Those are all adverse childhood experiences that whenever you take blame and shame out of the equation, they can imprint trauma into the system without there being abuse or intention present. So we really need to reframe how we look at abuse and trauma and how we talk about it, because there's not always intention or something, some horrible intent behind it to harm somebody. Sometimes it just happens that way. And in adulthood, in order to address my own issues, because it came pretty evident to me that I was dysfunctional. So it became pretty evident to me that I had a lot of dysfunctions, and I started to link it back to my childhood. And so I started taking classes and started learning about it. So when I combined my life experience with my professional education, that's how I became a trauma specialist. And I focus on developmental and intergenerational issues, which are the types of trauma that we carry through our life with us. And they can be really subtle and really sneaky in how they cause us to sabotage and, like shoot ourselves in the foot, so to speak. And I take a slightly different approach with a lot of my clients. Like I said, I work as an empowerment strategist. It's very similar to a coach. And the reason I call myself a strategist instead of a coach is a majority of the coaches that I've tried to work with work from some sort of protocol. They have a set standard that they go through. And that's not how I approach my clients. Again, I work with a little bit different target market and a little bit different population. So I'm really customizing the program for what my client needs, instead of saying the first time you come in, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do this. It's highly customized. So that's kind of a little just overview about me. Like you said, I live in Columbus, Ohio. Live, work, and play here, and I travel a lot too. So not always here. And I know that you wanted me to talk about, some of the ways that we do get in our own way, and some of the ways. Did you have any specific examples or anything from my presentation in Sedona that stuck out that you wanted me to expand on here, Lynn?
The thing that really stood out to me was I have become aware enough of my body, so I was able, I don't know, a year ago or so, to realize that my liver is where I hold my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm aware enough that I really can literally feel it when I'm holding my emotions in. And you talked about, I'd love for you to talk about what is happening to you when you hold something in and you don't allow yourself to acknowledge it.
Okay.
And accept it.
Okay.
That was huge for me.
Right. Okay. Exactly. So one of the best ways to ruin joy and happiness in your own life is to have expectations. So if you have expectations that everybody else out in the world is going to handle a given situation the same way you would, and you have this tendency to stand around and say, well, I just don't understand why they would do something like that. I wouldn't do something like that. Or why would they come into my house and say that? Or why would he do that to me? If that's the type of thought process that you have on a regular basis, you're going to be a miserable, suffering person inside yourself. Because there is an expectation that other people are going to do what you would do. And the more predictable a person is, the more traumatized they are. So trauma, and before I go on, I do want to say, when I'm talking about trauma, I'm not talking about you were in a car wreck and you're broken and you need stitched back together trauma. I'm talking about the trauma that happens inside of you as a result of abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, verbal abuse, neglect, being ignored, pushed aside, that sort of thing. So trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. It's anything that limits or constricts your ability to respond in a future situation. So it kind of pigeonholes you into a reactive behavior where you become predictable and people know exactly what you're going to do, instead of having that flexibility to respond in different ways. And one of the things that happens to us in childhood, and I don't believe for most of us it's intentional. I think a lot of it has to do with just, like we have this collective mentality in our society that goes generationally on, how parents raise their kids. When I was a kid, we got our butt smacked if we got in trouble. That was just common to get swatted on the butt. When I was a kid, there was corporal punishment in schools still. So, a lot of the teachers had paddles, and if it wasn't the teacher that had a paddle, the principal did. And so they would just, send everybody to the principal who needed to get their butt smacked that day. So that's how it was handled generationally then. By the time my generation had kids, we weren't paddling so much. There wasn't as much corporal punishment. It was timeouts. It was go to your room. It was, count to 5, separate yourself. So was one better than the other? They were both damaging and in different ways, because the hitting a kid brings about a different set of issues from trauma than ignoring a child does. And that's what timeouts do to children. Instead of helping them process the emotion, we put the kid in a timeout and expect them to be able to process the emotion on their own. Well, they can't figure it out. So what's happening inside the kid's body? Let's say you have a 4-year-old kid who's acting out and throwing a tantrum, and you tell the kid to go into timeout. The kid does not have the cognitive ability to process whatever emotion is coming up that is coming out in this physical tantrum. So the kid's might be kicking, screaming. What the kid does know is that it's super uncomfortable right now. Its heart's racing. It's probably got tension and tightness in the muscles. If you've ever seen a kid throw a tantrum, you see the hitting and the kicking, and just how kids get really tense and tight, and then sometimes they'll go the opposite and they'll get really noodly and collapse on the floor, and then they get tense and tighten up again. These are all physiological symptoms of the fight or flight response happening in the body. And ideally, a parent would be able to maintain their composure and keep the kid safe as the kid processes this confusing sensation in the body, which is anger or whatever it is that's coming out in a tantrum. So they're experiencing this emotion that they don't intellectually understand because they're not capable of intellectually understanding it. The body's just going through the motions. And if we could keep the kids safe and help them learn to process this, then they would become emotionally intelligent. Well, none of us had that when we were kids. We were sent to timeout where we just had to figure it out on our own. Or, we were paddled where we just had to sit and cry again and figure it out on our own. And that was most of us. So we come into adulthood with compensatory behaviors, because if you're a child and your parent continually is putting you in timeout because you're misbehaving, what's the kid going to do to compensate? The kid is going to think, oh my gosh, I really upset my mom. It's my fault that dad's upset. It's my fault that mom's upset. What can I do to make this better? How can I become the good girl? How can I please my parents? So there are all kinds of compensatory behaviors that come out of childhood, like people pleasing, being a high achiever. Sometimes kids get rebellious. Sometimes kids turn to drugs and alcohol. Sometimes people become addicted to things like sports where, you're the star athlete and you don't realize how miserable you are inside yourself, until you really start to get out of school and go on and discover who you are and realize that you spent all this time doing something you didn't want to do. So we start to compensate our behaviors, and we start to give up our authentic selves in order to please our parents and keep our parents happy. So as long as our parents aren't yelling at us, as long as our parents aren't putting us in timeout, that's what helps to alleviate the feeling inside of our body, which is a dysfunctional way to work with the feelings inside of our body instead of actually sitting with them and helping to process them so they don't get imprinted in the nervous system. Well, fast forward into adulthood, and this is tied in with feelings of anxiety and fear and sadness and depression and anger and rage and all of these emotions that once we get into adulthood, we like to label as negative. And because we label them as negative, negative is equated with bad. So we equate them as bad and we try to stuff them down and we do everything we can not to have those emotions. So in adulthood, we start to, have a glass of wine in the evenings, just to kind of wind down, or again, the over exercising, whatever that thing is that we're addicted to, eating food to make ourselves feel better. Screens is the new thing, constantly scrolling on Facebook, and just having that constant screen time can start to bring up feelings of loneliness, that perception that I'm lonely and I'm separate. And each time you get that little thumbs up or the like, you get that little dopamine hit in the brain that feels really good. So people become addicted to social media. And instead of learning, because we never learned in childhood how to sit and process our emotions, it's even more painful in adulthood to try to do it. So it's just acceptable. And what we're doing is we're essentially, let's say you grew up in a household where you were neglected. If you were neglected as a child, are you now doing that to yourself by pushing away these feelings? This is a big part of who you are when these emotions come up. And these emotions are part of our guidance system. They don't always feel comfortable. There is a felt sense to anger in the body. Some people, and a lot of people do hold anger in the liver area. And so that's what our higher self will do. It'll start to give us these little signals. So you'll start to notice that, gosh, I just don't feel right. And, something feels off. can't really pinpoint it, but maybe I should go to the doctor. Maybe I should get this checked out. Something just feels off in this part of my body. And if we're only addressing the physical aspect of it, we're going to miss the underlying emotional component that feeds into problems that we can bring in adulthood that often manifest as autoimmune diseases, chronic illnesses, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, things like that. There's an underlying emotional component to any chronic illness. And the chronic illness is one of the ways that our higher self will make us suffer to get our attention, kind of like the parent swatting you on the butt, only in a really different way to get your attention in order to wake you up and force you to take a new direction in your life because it knows that you're on the wrong path. And instead of learning, because we never learned in childhood how to sit and process our emotions, it's even more painful in adulthood to try to do it. So it's just acceptable. And what we're doing is we're essentially, let's say you grew up in a household where you were neglected. If you were neglected as a child, are you now doing that to yourself by pushing away these feelings? This is a big part of who you are when these emotions come up. And these emotions are part of our guidance system. They don't always feel comfortable. There is a felt sense to anger in the body. Some people, and a lot of people do hold anger in the liver area.
To what you were saying about the higher self and how your higher self is communicating to you that, hey, you have got to pay attention.
Yeah.
You need to be aware and you need to make a change. So to do that, let's talk about what you were saying about acknowledging, accepting. I think that's so important. We just have 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And when I did my presentation at Soul Treat, one of the things I did was I took all of you in the class through an inner journey where in this inner journey, I wasn't asking anybody in the room to get in touch with, like joy or happiness or envision your future. I asked everybody to find something that frustrated them that morning. Like tap into something that got you activated, got you riled up, maybe angered you a little bit. And then why it's so important not to push these things aside is what I do on that inner journey. And that is to acknowledge, to engage that anger that comes up or frustration or irritation, to engage it in a little conversation inside your own mind so you can find out what it's doing for you. Because there's nothing that originates from within you that's not somehow trying to help you or do something for you or protect you in some way. And the whole purpose of the inner journey to get in touch with your anger or frustration is to find out what is the anger trying to do for you. And I remember that you shared, and I got to be honest, Lenny, and I can't remember what it was, but I know for most people, the anger is somehow, and it's just a general theme. Was yours trying to protect you? Is that what it was trying to do? Somehow trying to protect you?
I don't even know if it was anger.
Yeah. Oh, I don't remember either. But for the average person, and again, there are exceptions to this rule, but for the average person, when they come out of that inner journey after talking to their anger, they come to realize that this anger that flares up inside of them, and I know the example I gave that day that really activated me was the person who kept tailgating me on the way to Soul Treat. Like I couldn't even see the license plate or the grill. They were driving that close behind me. I couldn't see it in my rearview mirror. So, and I'm like, oh my God, like, aren't people supposed to be spiritual here? And then I was getting really frustrated. And so when I asked that frustration and anger inside of me, why are you here today? Like, why are you irritated in this moment? And it was trying to keep me safe. It was trying to bring up this frustration, and in hopes that, like, when I really picked it apart, it was trying to keep me safe. It was trying to get me to do something to react in order to keep me safe because it didn't want me to get hurt. And so as noble as it is when it shows up, it oftentimes shows up in dysfunctional ways. So, you're driving down the road and this irritation is like, oh my gosh. So the sensation is trying to communicate to me that I'm not safe. My interpretation is, I feel frustrated. I have this uncomfortable feeling in my body. So what's the first thing I do whenever I experience that? I look in the rearview mirror and I say, what an asshole. And I project it out to the guy behind me instead of acknowledging that there's something in me that's scared and it's trying to keep me safe. So again, it's this twisted way that it works. And at the same time, when you get to the bottom of it, you realize that as soon as I start to think to myself, or even say out loud, this guy's a jerk who's behind me, I'm projecting it out at him, because it's really not about him. It's about me. And it's about what I'm experiencing inside myself. Because I can't say that every single person who was driving on the road that morning, who had that car behind them driving that closely, would have been frustrated to the same extent that I was. Some people may have been way more frustrated or enraged, and some people might not even have noticed.
Right.
So
those extremes. And so
yeah.
to accept it, your process is to first acknowledge it and go through you ask yourself some questions.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Why am I feeling this at this
time? Right. And well, the first thing you've got to do is identify the feeling. You've got to be able to identify. So there is some level of self-awareness and self-observation that has to take place. So once you're aware that you're experiencing the feeling, then you can start to engage it in conversation. A lot of times the feeling has a location in the body. So if you can identify the feeling and the location in the body, a lot of times you could be, you can just ask it, like, gosh, if you could speak, what would you say? And if you ask that question, if you could speak, what would you say to the discomfort that you feel in your liver or wherever that irritation shows up? Don't think about the answer. Just wait for the answer to emerge. Because if you tried to think up an answer, then that's your narrator taking over. That's the super ego going, oh, this is, imagining what it would say, versus sometimes it's just one word. Sometimes it's a short phrase. And, like I said, I know the day that we did the inner journey and I talked everybody through it, my answer was trying to keep you safe. It was just a short little phrase and it was that quick and it came really, really quickly, trying to keep you safe.
That's perfect. So back to what I was saying at the very beginning when we started, when I was saying something about the ideal that everything just needs to be peaches and roses, and then that's how I can be happy. Well, that's not reality. That's not life. And so I have to honor, all of us have to honor our feeling. So identify it, be aware. And then really another message that I remember really is that there's no right or wrong. So I remember you talking about negative.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I didn't really agree with what you were saying. And I think it's just because I didn't understand it. But now you talk a little bit more about negative feelings and negative things. And really, I see what you're saying about there's really not anything negative. It's really just our interpretation.
Exactly.
So
it's your interpretation. Yeah. It's all about interpretation. And whenever we have this ideal in our mind of what life should be like, and one of my personal thoughts, like the whole Don Quixote thing, it's like crazy people out there like, oh my goodness. Okay. Like everybody has their ideal in their head, not even thinking that what makes something great to me or something ideal or looking through my rose-colored glasses might be vastly different than what you see through your rose-colored glasses. So we're all striving for some ideal that exists within our own head that might not be shared with anybody else on the planet. And so if you have this ideal in your head that nobody else shares with you,
Yeah.
then yeah, of course you're going to be miserable
You're
that
getting
that
in a
doesn't
lot of trouble.
manifest in your life. Exactly. You're going to be miserable that that doesn't manifest in your life. So if you're trying to fight it, you're going to suffer miserably inside yourself because things aren't going the way you think they should. But if you can expand your consciousness and say, yeah, okay, there are some really horrible things that happen in this world, and there are horrible things that happen on this planet. And if I can accept that, yeah, natural disasters happen, horrible tragedies happen, illnesses happen, sicknesses happen, and it might get me one of these days. If I can accept that that's a possibility, then I can focus my attention on things that make me happy. And if I'm trying to fight these things and I'm trying to push them aside all the time, then all of my attention is focused on how can we get rid of these things that I don't want, instead of just accepting that they're there. They might not be part of your life on a daily basis. If you can't accept that these things that you don't want are there, you're going to suffer. And if you're trying to get rid of them, that's where all your attention is going. And that's what we do in America, is we focus our attention on the things we don't want by bitching and complaining and gossiping all the time. and by engaging in those behaviors, we manifest the very things that we don't want, because we're so focused on how can we get rid of what we don't want rather than how can we have more of what we do want.
Yeah. That's something we'll have to do. You'll have to talk about that another time.
Yeah.
We are out of time, and that last thing that you were just saying,
Mm-hmm.
I think is the icing on the cake, because when you, no matter what's going on around you,
Mm-hmm.
when you can accept it, then you are so empowered.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't matter if it's happening at the macro level with something that's happening in society, or on the micro level with an emotion that's coming up in you. If you've got an emotion that's coming up in you and you're so focused on how do I get rid of this emotion and how do I push it away and how do I stuff it
Yeah,
down,
it's not my ideal.
exactly, you're going to be miserable rather than just accepting that, okay, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, and with this body comes emotions that are uncomfortable sometimes, comes tragedy, comes illness, comes broken bones, like all kinds of horrible things can happen to us.
Yeah.
In these bodies. So with these bodies comes good and bad. And if you are not willing to accept the stuff that you label as bad, you're going to be miserable because you're going to be so focused on trying to push them aside that you can't accept the good that you have.
Yeah.
So it's macro, micro, both.
This is so necessary, and it means a lot to me, that this instruction, and it, like, I really suffer with the other. And so it really means a lot to me, and I am going to take it to heart. And so I hope that our listeners also, I hope that you can make some changes, and especially with this new year, new decade. I don't know how many of you have thought about your word for the year. Acceptance or acknowledgement might be a good one. Mm-hmm. Just putting it out there. So Jennifer, I want to say thank you so very much. I'd love to have you as a guest again. You're brilliant. The way you present, your imagery.
I'd love to come back. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. And your podcast is called And?
Yes, and. Oh. Yeah. Yes, and with Jennifer Whitacre. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. And if people want to get in touch with you personally, what's a good way to get in touch with you?
You can find me on my website at jenniferwhitacre.com. Okay. Yeah, and that's so I don't know if people can see my name. Jennifer is JENNIFER. Whitacre is WHITACRE.com.
Okay.
And I have a podcast tab there too, so you can visit my podcast page, and it's video, audio, and blog.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. And Jennifer, have a fabulous 2020. I look forward to seeing you in October. Will you be there at Soulstreet?
I don't know. Right now I have a conflict and it doesn't look like I'm going to make it. So okay. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it this year.
Well,
I'm so
sad.
Know
our paths will cross again.
Yes, they will.
and
They
positive.
will.
Well, you have a wonderful year, and thank you so much.
You too. Thanks, Lynn Ann.
Thank you.